Last summer in a national weekly news magazine, a man wrote an article entitled "Broken Families, Broken Economy, the Real Obstacle to Growth." And Mitch Perlstein, the author of that article, writes that part of the problem with our American economy is actually a breakdown in the home. He points out that long before divorce wrecks the home, children are often already being neglected and ignored. And because of that, their education suffers. And so they're often graduating from high school, making poor grades, uneducated, not qualified to enter into the workforce, and therefore the economy suffers because of it. And so aside from the fact that over the last, 30 years, 40 years, we've killed millions of babies through abortion, who would now be in the workforce, contributing to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all of that, we've wiped out generations of workers. The disintegration of the family is having other profound impacts on our society as a whole. Why is the family so important to a society? Now, a sociologist, George Murdoch, had done some research on 250 cultures throughout the world and down through time. And he found that every society is based on a family that includes a father and a mother and immature children. Every society is based on what you and I might define today as the nuclear family. Well, why are societies, aside from the Bible, and we'll get to the Bible in just a moment, but aside from what the Bible teaches, why is the family the core of a society? Well, there are a couple of reasons why. Let's think physically for just a moment. In contrast to animals, the process of reproduction in humans is more than just physical. When humans come together to have children, to reproduce, it is as much emotional as it is physical. We come together and we marry, and that's where the family is created, because we love someone, and that act of love then creates children. And so the family, marriage, the home is that area, that sphere, where that process of reproducing happens. Again, in contrast to the animal world. The animal world doesn't come together to reproduce in an act of love. Second reason, of course, is that when we have children, it takes time to raise those children, doesn't it? In contrast again to the animal creation, which does not have marriage and does not have families, in human beings, it takes almost 2 decades to raise children to where they can go out and make it on their own. Because the process of maturing in human beings is more than just physical. It is also emotional and intellectual and spiritual. And so the family is that sphere in which that process takes place. And so once again, every society, just about in humankind's history, has been based on the family. Well, let's define what the home is. The dictionary definition of the home is the place where a person or a family lives. One's dwelling place, specifically your house or your apartment or wherever you may live, permanently or temporarily. It could be the region or the city or the state where you live, a place thought of as home, specifically, notice, a place where one likes to be. A place that is restful or congenial. Now, if we broaden that definition, we would start talking about the society. A society is a group of homes. A society is a group of families. And it could be a small group, like Bourbon Acres, where we live. That's a society. Or it could be a little bit larger, like the city of Paris, or a little larger, like the county of Bourbon. Or it could be the state of Kentucky. Or it could be a country. The United States, or we might say the United Homes of America, where a bunch of families are working together, helping each other in that society. Well, the problem with the United Homes of America is that the homes themselves in our society are disintegrating and being attacked from all sides by the devil himself. And that's what I want us to address this morning. We want to go back and point out, of course, once again, that the home began, marriage began in the mind and in the heart of God Himself. Genesis chapter 2 is familiar to most, if not all of us. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, God made man out of the dust of the earth. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, something that God did not do in any other of His creation. Man is uniquely made in the image of God. And God put Adam to sleep, into a deep sleep, and He took a rib from Adam's side, and He fashioned woman to be a helper suitable for Adam. Of course, remember, the first thing God did when He saw that Adam was alone is that He caused all the animals to pass in front of Adam. And Adam realized that there was not a helper suitable for him among all of God's animal creation. And so God created a special, unique being, also made in His image, but different from the man. And God brought the two of them together at the end of that chapter, verses 22 and 24. And Adam looked at Eve and he says, wow, she is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She is united to me in a way that the animals are not. And so man needs to leave his father and mother, and he needs to cleave to his wife. And the two of them, in God's eyes, became one flesh. Now there's a couple of things that we learn from those few verses there in Genesis chapter 2. And that is, first of all, that marriage is truly made in heaven. Now you may not think that your particular marriage is made in heaven. I hope you do. But marriage itself is made in heaven. Man did not create marriage. Man did not create the family. In fact, it's easy to look around in our society today and see that man destroys family. Everything man touches, he destroys. And so God is the one who started, who created the marriage relationship. Marriage is made in heaven. Marriage is a product of, it is a child of God's heart. God created us to enjoy that. The second thing that we learn is that marriage exists for a couple of reasons. One is marriage exists so that man would not be alone. God saw man was alone, and so God created woman. God doesn't want man to be alone. He doesn't want man to be isolated. We are social beings. Now clearly there are times when we want to be left alone. There are times when we need to be left alone. But we are social beings. God created us that way. He created us by marriage and in our homes. The second reason we see in this passage that God created marriage is so that mankind, of course, could reproduce. God created that so that we could continue on our human creation generation after generation. And so if you go back and look again at what Adam said when God brought Eve to him, he says that man needs to leave his father and mother and he needs to cleave to his wife. And so we have a new social unit that is created. We have a new family that is created. We leave our family of origin and we create a new family. And so important is that new family that God says, I don't want you to break it up. God says, I am a witness to your contract that you enter into in marriage, Malachi chapter 2. And God says, I hate it when you break it up. particularly verse 6, that this marriage needs to last forever, or at least here on this earth, till death parts us, as we say. And so God created marriage to be that sphere in which children are created and children are educated. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through our lesson. And so children are an important part of this equation. So important is our children and the marriage relationship that God says in the law of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that parents need to teach their children the law of God from the time they wake up in the morning and until the time they go to bed at night. You need to have my scriptures written across your forehead, God says. And then, of course, children have a responsibility in the home as well. Ephesians chapter 6, children are to obey their parents in the Lord, for this is the right thing to do, Paul says. And I remind us that under the law of Moses, rebellious children were given the death penalty. That illustrates to us how strongly God feels about children, number one, obeying their parents in the home, and number two, that parents have the responsibility to teach their children to obey them. We've got a lot of parents today in our country who don't make their children obey them. And we're setting them up for failure. Because obedience is learned, first of all, in the home. And so children are to honor and obey their parents. So what does the home contribute to our society? First of all, the home is where we learn how to be stable and mature adults. Now, Wednesday night we're studying the letter of Paul to the Galatian Christians. And right now we've just finished Galatians chapter 5 where Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, kindness, meekness, self-control. Where do you learn the fruit of the Spirit? Where do you learn how to be patient? Where do you learn how to be kind? Under God's plan, you learn it first in the home. How do you learn to be kind unless you've got a sister who's mean to you? Where do you learn to be gentle unless you've got a younger brother or sister who gets on your nerves all the time? Is constantly getting into your stuff. Where do you learn self-control except when the kitchen is messy? Somebody's got to go clean it up. The home is where adults are created and produced who can be stable and loving. And so our family keeps us from growing to be selfish, tyrannical adults. Now, what's going to happen to our society in another generation or so where we've got people, adults now, who have not been taught that when they were kids? How many times have you ran into an adult even today and you think, wow, they must not have had a mom or dad who taught them some things? Well, just wait till we've got 2 or 3 generations who are going through that very thing. And so the home, as God planned it, is a place where children are taught to grow up to be nurturing and stable adults. And of course, is the place where we train to have well-behaved children. And we're going to talk about real-world parenting next Lord's Day. But what happens in a home if mama consistently loses her temper? What are the children going to grow up seeing and observing and then living out in their own lives if they see mama losing her temper all the time? She gets mad at dad because of what he does or doesn't do, and she throws dishes, or the wall breaks him, or whatever. What kind of children are growing up and learning in that environment? What kind of children are we going to have if dad strikes out every time he gets mad? Every time he loses his temper, he hits somebody or something. Then we've got children growing up thinking that every time you get mad, you punch somebody. So you see, the home is the place where parents now, the responsibility is on our